Welcome to another night of Artists Now. And welcome to our free and open lecture series. If you're just visiting, obviously welcome to my students and all the other art students and folks across campus. So it's become routine for me to hype up the next lecture in the Artists Now series. And it's not next week, it is in 2 weeks. So yes, my class meets next week. We're looking at global street art, artists like J.R., Banksy, you name it. The politics and the economy of street art should be a really interesting class, but that's just for my class. Everyone who comes religiously to the Artists Now talks, come back and join us in 2 weeks for Nohl Fellow, who is a Nohl winner as well. So this is great. We have 2 Nohl winners in a row. Her work's on display at INOVA, down at the Kenilworth building. Photographer, come see her talk. It's really important to support local artists. I think she's here tonight. Is that true? Yes, hello. Congratulations on the award. And congratulations to Faythe. This is Faythe's second Nohl Award. And before I hand it over to Polly, who will introduce Faythe, I should give my own spiel and my take on this. Milwaukee is a fascinating place to be an artist because of the people. It's the people that drive this artistic community. And the more I stay here, the more I get engaged. When you become part of the community, you give back to it. And artists do not work in isolation. Even the hermetic artists who have a very isolated studio practice still rely on so many people for their work to thrive. There are a number of people who are just engines that drive, that make our opportunities so much more multifaceted and make this exciting place to be an artist. One of my colleagues, Josie Osborne, has set up opportunities for myself and other artists. And I see her every time Josie's meeting with people, she's thinking about how can I help this person? How can I match this person up in the community? She is just one of these people who gives back religiously and gives back and makes this a stronger art community. Faythe Levine, who's presenting tonight, is more than just a maker. She's someone who creates community. A lesson to our students is just making art is not enough. It's interesting, but forming networks, creating other opportunities for others, brings opportunities to yourself. It creates community, not only locally, but internationally and nationally. That's one of the reasons why the Artists Now series is so vital, because you see how artists work. Faythe, I've known Faythe since the early 90s. I've seen her work in the DIY community and become this incredibly exceptional artist in film, and craft, and writing. But at the core of her practice is an extensive network. It's really amazing. And to my right is Polly Morris, who I think the majority of the artists in Milwaukee owe her this incredible debt of gratitude, because Polly's always creating opportunities for artists, including the Nohl Grant, really taking some of the money from the Mary Nohl Fund and establishing one of the best individual grant opportunities for artists anywhere in the country, in my mind. A lot of this comes from Polly. If you follow the Linden Sculpture Garden, you'll see that place is just an epicenter of activity because this person. So that is every time I introduce you, every time Polly comes here, all I do is sing her praise, because she's so important. Everyone in this room who's worked with her knows it. So introducing a real hero in the arts, Polly Morris.
Thank you, Nicholas. That was really over the top, and he did a really good job of introducing Faythe. So I will just say a few things. Do I have this in the right place? I urge you all to go down and visit the Nohl Show at INOVA. Has everybody here visited INOVA at least once since they've been around? Yes, good. So there's 7 different artists in this show. There's a great catalog with essays about each of the 7 artists, including a really nice essay about Faythe's work by Tennessee Jones. I urge you to read it. And there's a postcard that lists all the ancillary events that we schedule throughout the Nohl exhibition to kind of bring people in contact with living local artists. And This is actually the second plus event of Faythe's, because she screened her latest film, Sign Painters, on Saturday at the Milwaukee Film Festival, and she screened it twice more, or has 2 more coming up. She'll screen it again at the Union later in the year, so if you didn't get to see it during the film festival, I urge you to turn out at the Union to see it. We in Milwaukee know Faythe in many guises, as someone who produces books and films, Handmade Nation, now Sign Painters, both films with books attached to them. Used to have the Flying Fish Gallery and Paper Boat, now has Sky High, has organized art versus craft for a decade, I believe, and has also tirelessly traveled literally all over the globe. In addition to winning 2 Nohl Fellowships, once as an emerging artist in 2007 and then now as an established artist, Faythe has won a couple of suitcase grants that have allowed her to take her films far afield, most recently to Thailand. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Faythe.
Okay, just give me 1 second. So, is that in a good spot? I can't tell.
Someone back there will be able to tell you.
Can you guys hear, if I speak at this level, are you guys good? We're good, okay. I speak in front of people all the time, and I wasn't nervous, and then having 2 introductions just made me really sweaty. So I'm a really casual talk giver. As you may have just heard, I do a lot of different things, and when I do different lectures to different groups of either students or whoever is at a specific event, depending on what I'm speaking to, because I work in a lot of different fields, I do try and kind of let people know that I do all these other things at the same time, because the one thing about my work is that as I've continued to do projects and make things, they've all started to start to overlap more and more as my life work, I guess. But there's a lot more connectors than I used to see when I was younger, when I was just kind of focused on finishing one thing and then moving on to the next project. So I decided for this talk tonight to sort of go a different direction than I normally do. And I actually normally speak more about my other things that I do, like projects, curatorial projects, or photo projects. Well, let's see, I don't know what order my slides are in there. Real professional. So basically, I have a lot of images, and I'm probably going to jump around a lot, and maybe at the end you'll start to see like how they all overlap and tie together. But I tried to do 3 different themes, and I did want to kind of go through the things in Milwaukee really quickly that I do to put into context for you what I'm doing locally, since I am speaking in Milwaukee, which I'm not always. But this photo, and it's interesting, and this is a really good way to start off the talk, this was taken in the early 90s in Seattle. I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle across the lake in Kirkland, Washington. So most of my teen years were spent taking the bus back and forth into the city, and I was really lucky at the time because the music scene that was going on in the early 90s in Seattle and in the suburbs was phenomenal. So I had access and exposure to a lot of incredible bands, a lot of incredible underground media. It's where I first heard about zine culture, self-published magazines, and DIY itself, do-it-yourself culture itself. And so my work still is very much rooted in the ethos of my teen years. But when we were setting up the computer, I was scrolling through the slides really quickly, and Nicholas was like, hey, that's in Seattle. And we realized that probably the first time that we met was at the Black Cat Cafe, which was an anarchist vegan cafe in the city that I was a collective member at for a number of years. And it was kind of at this spot where a lot of my early connections with a lot of people who I still work with to this day were formed. And that was the perfect example, because here I am in Nicholas's classroom in Milwaukee, and this was almost 20 years ago, probably. That's terrifying. Okay, so moving along. This is actually, this is one of, I don't have a ton of photos from Flying Fish Gallery, which Polly mentioned, which is really lovely, because Flying Fish was my first gallery space in Milwaukee, and it was in 2001. It was a year-long project I did with my boyfriend at the time, Brent Goodsell, in River West. And I really wanted to have a space where I could start showing people's work that I knew was going on around me. There's always this drive to kind of have a space to create events, to like showcase people's work. That was always this kind of, and has been, and I guess you'll see throughout these slides, but this is we were only open one day a week. It was a very informal space, which actually most of my gallery spaces have been and continue to be, not traditional gallery spaces, but this was kind of the pre-thought to me owning a retail store, which came many years later, and this was the one little shelf of merch, and as you can see, Found magazine, which some of you guys might know, and records, and there's some cassette tapes on there, and zines from a number of people. So this was across the street from Polish Falcon, which some of you guys might know that. So that's the one picture of flying fish that I have in my archives that's worth showing. During that same time, I moved from River West up into Brewers Hill in the Fortress building, and I don't know if any of you guys know people who work there. This is a picture of when I started moving away from working like a day job full time and moving into doing studio practice and trying to make a living as an illustrator and as an artist and as a maker. And so this is in the height of, I believe, the holiday season, probably in 2003. I just like to show the messy photos because everyone always shows these like perfect studios with everything color coordinated, and my studio is a total shithole. Which I think if you're busy, it tends to be, and like that's, you know, I think it's important. And actually this photo, when I was more engaged on Flickr, I'm a big user of social media, and Flickr for a long time was a big way that I was getting to meet people in other places. I don't use Flickr as much anymore, but this is one of the most hits, and I don't remember now what it is, the number-wise, but it was like, I feel like over 100,000 people have looked at this photo, which I thought was so weird, but I think it's because it's messy. So, Polly also mentioned that I have founded and coordinated Art versus Craft. And can I just see a show of hands, because a lot of your students, how many of you guys have been? That's totally crazy. So you guys should go, because this is the last year I'm doing it. And I started Art versus Craft in 2004, and it was basically rooted out of participating in a craft fair in Chicago called Renegade, which some of you guys might be familiar with. Renegade now has, they do craft fairs all around the country, and they actually just started doing one in London. But I was participating in Renegade Craft Fair as a maker, and it was the first time I had sold my work. And some of it was more craft oriented, some of it I would consider more mixed media based, but it was the first time I had sold work face to face to an audience, and it was the first time I had met a lot of the people who I had been engaging with online on these craft forums. And so the experience of being in person and having that face-to-face exchange for me was extremely important, because I was a very latecomer to the internet. I was really hesitant to switch from writing letters, like literal letters, to sending emails, because I was worried that there would be a loss of connection and the impersonal elements of what you don't get out of seeing someone's handwriting and whatnot. So, which I still believe, but I don't write very many letters anymore. So, having this craft fair in this space in Chicago, I came back home and I thought, well, I want this to happen in Milwaukee. I want Milwaukee to have a marketplace where emerging artists and crafters and makers and whatever, I wasn't really concerned. I'm not really concerned with the definitions of art and craft, which is why I called it Art versus Craft. I wanted to have a space where people could sell their work, basically. So I didn't know what I was doing, and I found a space, and 10 years later, I'm still doing the show. We get about 4,000 people through in a single day, and it's a really fantastic community event. And I'm tired of doing it, which is why it's the last year. And I feel like there's other amazing craft fairs that happen in Milwaukee. Hovercraft is a really good example of a really fantastic show that's supporting emerging designers, and so I felt like I'm not of the breed where I feel like you have to do something forever. I think it was a good time to end on a high note, and so if you're interested in coming to Art vs. Craft, you better come now. It's always the Saturday after Thanksgiving, if anyone's interested. So after Flying Fish closed, I really missed putting on gallery shows, and so I was doing Art vs. Craft, and I was meeting all of these people who were making all this incredible work locally and internationally, and I really wanted to have a retail space because, again, looking at something on a flat screen, especially if it's something handmade, I just feel like it's so much different to get to hold that item. It's so different to get to like flip through a zine and like scroll through on a screen. So I opened up the store, and the top photo is just one of our openings that night, and the bottom photo is the front and the gallery space. So we had a retail space, and then there was an informal gallery space up front. And so we were able to bring in artists. What I really was interested in and have been interested in is bringing artists in from out of the state to Milwaukee so people here can get exposure to work that they wouldn't see in other places in Milwaukee. But we also work with local artists at Paperboat as well. And so Paperboat was open for 4 years. This is an inside shot. This is actually an opening for an artist named David Stein, who is a Wisconsin-born artist, and now he lives in Portland, Oregon. And this is actually in the front there. That was my band, Wooden Robot. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how music has influenced me creatively as well. So I played with this experimental band for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And Wooden Robot ended up being the soundtrack for my first film. So you can start to see how these things begin to overlap. I played the musical Saw, in case anyone's interested. And that's just, you can look at musical Saw. So again, things were moving forward. I was making all these connections with different artists and makers, and I saw the media paying attention to what was going on within the resurgence of craft and DIY within the younger generation. And I felt very protective of that community because I had invested so much time and energy with my own work, with building this community, with making these connections. And I knew that someone was going to come and make some sort of expose about cute girls making crafts, and that's so not what it was about. For me, the DIY indie craft movement was about empowerment and about control over your life, about what it means to be able to do whatever you want creatively. And for a lot of people, it was about monetary independence and having the ability to start your own business. So I thought, okay, well, I better make a movie, even though I'd never made a movie before. But I did do commercial production, so I wasn't coming in totally without any experience. Commercial production was one of my many jobs that I was doing simultaneously with doing my own projects. So, you know, service industry, I think it's really important for artists to talk about how there's like this veil of like being a successful or a working artist, and what does that mean? And I have always continually had to do multiple jobs to make ends meet, which I'm happy to talk about more later. So I decided to make a documentary. It was called Handmade Nation, and myself and Michaela O'Herlihy, who is my director of photography, who is a graduate of the film department here at UWM, who was living in Milwaukee at the time. I asked her if she was interested. She was an experimental filmmaker that had commercial film experience, and I said, do you want to travel around and make this documentary with me? And she said, sure. And I offered to pay all her expenses, and that was basically my offer to her. At the time, she was a single mother, so we had to schedule our production shoots around childcare, and basically we spent a year and a half picking out certain areas of the country to go to, and we'd cram as much into like 3 days as possible, and I'd do all the scheduling of interviews beforehand. So the outcome of that, the timing with that project was very, I've stopped using the word lucky because I feel like it undersells what I've done, and I'm trying to own that a little bit more. The timing was very synchronous in the sense that I was correct with acknowledging the fact that the media was going to continue to pay more and more attention to this reinterest in handmade and in process. And I feel like that is still continuing to go on and actually is led into my next project, Sign Painters. But what happened was Handmade Nation became the go-to material for any article or reference about craft. And so the timing of the release of the project was fantastic. And what I did was I basically branded, without really knowing what branding was at the time, the idea and the concept of the film by blogging the process and making very public where we were going, what we were doing, and people really started to follow what we were doing because it was very personal and not like, I'm having a bad day and I ate eggs for breakfast, personal, but like, you know, we got up at 6 and we flew here and now we're going to go meet this person. And this was all before, you know, Twitter and Instagram, so it was all just on Blogspot and MySpace. So the film production was going on, and I got approached by a number of publishers who were interested in a book proposal, a companion book, and they all wanted to do these how-to books. And I'm like, no, this isn't what this is about. This is about the people and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And finally, I signed a book deal with Princeton Architectural Press, who's still my publisher to this day. And they were really excited about that idea. And so the book actually ended up coming out before the film because they had a budget and a deadline, which we had neither of. And then the film followed up, I think, about 4 or 5 months after that. And it had a really fantastic run. And I traveled with it for almost 2 years, doing screenings and lectures and educational workshops with that. So to jump now to Sky High Gallery, which is where I'm currently curating at. It's in Bayview. It's behind Sky High Skateboard Shop. This is just, I'm going to quickly just talk about this. Sky High, we don't do, I stopped doing retail because the labor of love of staffing someone in a shop that's not busy enough to support itself for me in Milwaukee wasn't worth it, which was part of the problem at Paper Boat. So we just do, I would say, 5 to 8 exhibits a year. This was one of the more labor-intensive installations. This is a site-specific installation by Monica Canilau, who is a Bay Area artist. And this was a project that we let this show run for 3 months because it was a really, really intense installation where they worked 18-hour days for a week straight. I'm just going to blaze through because I always talk longer than I think I will. Another thing that we do at Sky High is a project. So in the gallery, I try and bring people into Milwaukee from out of state, but then I also do want to continue to support local artists. So we have a project on the outside of the building. I found a loophole within the city ordinances with murals, because if you're going to have a mural on your building, technically you're supposed to submit a sketch to the city and then they have to approve it, which I don't even understand who gets to approve your design. It's totally bullshit. And then you can't advertise anything, which is fine, and you can't, and there's all these like stupid rules. So I thought, well, I guess if it's not actually painted on the building, then it's technically legal. So we have a temporary mural project, which it's an invitational project where we ask artists, local artists to, we provide them with 8 foot by 8 foot square, and they paint whatever they want, and it needs to have, like, not a positive message. We ask that there's no, like, guns or drugs or nudity, because we do live in a neighborhood, and that's not what we're trying to put out into the neighborhood. So we ask that it gives a positive message in some manner that can be interpreted basically however you want. I don't ask for sketches. I let the artists have full control over what they want to do. And this is one of the murals from, I think, last year or the year before, and this is Akil Flamini and Ella Dwyer, 2 local artists, and they collaborated on this project. So and then I created a postcard series from the mural. So every artist gets, I like the idea of like a souvenir or a takeaway thing, so we do these limited edition postcard series for each mural. And that's partially also from just my archival obsession, so I have something that's like still physical. We might end up losing these murals at some point, but at least there's this like physical thing and it doesn't just exist on the internet. Okay, none of those things are exactly necessarily my personal art practice, but they all overlap with what I'm doing creatively. So this quote is from an interview that was in American Craft magazine, and I was talking, it was about craft activism and people's motivations for making, and I think it sums up, I believe, a lot of what's important to me and what I'm looking at in the world and why I'm interested in helping and connecting people. It was exactly kind of, Nicholas sort of summarized my talk for me, which is when you have all these people around you, like if you're a student here right now, like and potentially you didn't have an art community that you were coming out of, the few people that you connect with here is going to be the foundation for wherever you all go. And you may not stay in touch with them all the time, but those people you can take advantage of their resources, and you can help them and say, oh, well, I know this photographer, from school. There are just these ways to start pulling and connecting all these people around you. And so that's a big part of what I do. And like you saw with that first photo from that cafe in Seattle, it's been really interesting to see that happen over the last 15 years for me. So the next couple of pictures, I've never shown these before, and so this is kind of interesting. And this is just like interesting to see more of that. This is from my iPhone. I'm like, okay. So some of my older projects, which I don't ever talk about, and this is kind of exciting for me, I've always been interested in documenting everything. I think as an artist in any medium, you should always be documenting your progress. And I always talk about this with students because you never know where your career, where your creative trajectory is going to go, and it's going to be really, really fantastic to be able to reference that. And so I can't stress that enough. And I mean, even if you're not a student, I feel like having snapshots, they don't have to be, the higher quality, the better, it doesn't hurt, but it's really important to document what you're working on. So I pulled some old stuff down today because I was like, I'm going to talk about something different. And so these are contact sheets from when I still shot film, and I used to throw these parties. I was living in Minneapolis before I moved to Milwaukee. I moved here in 2001. I lived in Minneapolis for 4 years prior, and my community in Minneapolis was very centered around the West Bank, which is a neighborhood, which actually is the whole reason why I ended up making sign painters, which is also very interesting. But I was really obsessed with those photos, like the old timey photos of like the ladies sitting in like the paper moon, like lounging. And so I wanted to be able to photograph people in a portrait setting where it could be more formal than just having, I wanted people to be comfortable at the same time, but have it be fun. So I made this giant paper moon, and I made this giant paper mache horseshoe, and then I made one of those like things where you stick your face through it, which I don't think that's represented here at all, but it had these skeletons dancing on top of a burning city. And so this was called, these are contact sheets from the paper moon ball. And then what I did was, 6 months later, I had a photo show with all the portraits. So it was a double whammy. I had the party where everyone got to come to the party, get their pictures taken. And then I had the reception with all the portraits, so everyone came to see their picture. And then I made those prints available to people at the time. So this is the flyer for the show. And if you've ever been to Minneapolis, the Seward Cafe is like this great community space. This is another example of one of the parties that I threw. I have a feeling I did this weird. Yeah, well, let's look at this slide because that was what was supposed to be there. So on the left is the flyer for the party, and this was a masquerade ball for New Year's Eve. And so the idea for this party was to get photos of everyone in costume. And then I had the photo show, and then it was the going away party for when I actually moved here to Milwaukee. So it was kind of another double hitter. And then of course a lot of these events would have bands play, so there was again that connection to music. And then the next couple photos are just going to be flyers that I designed, and it was kind of fun. I pulled all these out of the same box. So a lot of these flyers, I never did much design on the computer, so a lot of it was combinations of found imagery from traveling. This is from a fairy tale book from India that I got when I went to India, and then just some whiteout pen on top of that. And Kinko's had free color copies back then, which I took advantage of. So I also used a lot of Letraset letters, which are the rub-on transfer letters from drafting, and I still use those now when I do mixed media work. There's like a big staple of, so Wooden Robot, that's my band. So the Letraset letters are a big staple for me because I can manipulate them in a way that I have control over, where you could definitely do on a computer. I work better when it's like physically in front of me. This is an example. So the flyers and the letters and doing all the lettering has always been something from since I was a teenager and I was making zines. And this was a way for me to be able to make something and hang it up. And flyer art has always been really important for me. This was a 2-color stencil, the black photocopy. This is an interesting. So I started collaborating. Probably around 2005, 2006 with local musician Nathan Lilly, who's in this band called Call Me Lightning. And we did a number of album covers together where he would do the design and then I would paint them, and then this was a 7-inch eventually that turned into a record. And I dated it, and this is a photo that I use because you guys should always date your stuff, even if it's on the back. Like if you look, none of these flyers have dates, and it drives me crazy because even though it wasn't that long ago, I could not tell you if it was like, there's like this 5-year span that this fits into, and I could probably narrow it down. But it would just have been so much easier if I put a year on it. So dumb. So you should date your stuff. This is a more recent-ish, meaning in the last 5 years, flyer. And this was a flyer for an art show that I did right before I started working on Handmade Nation. And so this was probably the last time since this fall that I had shown any artwork aside from my films. And that was a really big turning point for me because my studio turned into my office, and it's been my office pretty substantially. And I'm actually moving back into, I just signed a lease on a new art studio, and I'm going to move back in that direction, which I'm really excited about.
Where's it at?
Mike Brenner's new building.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I was just looking to see what time it is. Yeah, okay. No, I know.
Most people go to 8.
Okay, cool. So these are some of my older pieces of, just some random pieces of work from that show. I was working a lot with flattened cans that I would collect from all over the city and do these collages. Okay, so this is, I'm not gonna read this because I will just butcher it, but I was just flipping through a catalog for a show yesterday. I tend to buy, I'm a big book buyer, and sometimes I don't actually look at the book that I bought until like a year later. It's like backlogged in a serious way. But if I go to an exhibit or if I find someone's work that I like, I always make sure and buy the book because I want to have it in my library, and I want to have that resource and that content. So I've been trying to kind of force myself to go through some of these books that have been around for a long time that I have looked in, and this one was in the foreword for this poem. And this woman is a Chicago-born poet, but I really liked this because it made me think about my photographs, which I haven't spoken about that much, except that I said you should document your work. But photography for me is actually the main thread that has lasted through all of my work continually since I was about 12 when my dad gave me my first camera. And I still to this day hesitate calling myself a photographer, even though I am. I've gotten paid to do commercial work. I have photos currently at the Nohl show. I have photos in an exhibit at Carnegie Mellon right now. But I technically am still struggling with the same way that I struggle calling myself a filmmaker, and I'm very much a filmmaker. But more importantly is the details, and I'm very interested in the details, and so I was really excited about this lovely little poem. So I'm just gonna kind of show you some of my older photographs. So again, this is like some work that most people don't ever get to see. So, and then I'm gonna talk more about my current projects, including sign painters, and also this land project that's an ongoing photo essay that I've been working on for a number of years. So this is, like Polly said, I travel a lot. I've always traveled a lot. Now I travel mostly for work. I'm really lucky where I get flown around to all over the country, sometimes to like tiny itty bitty towns, which are actually my favorite, and then just, you know, the usual places, I guess, like where you would consider art things to happen. I just got back from Scotland the night before the Nohl opening last week. Was that last week? Was that 2 weeks ago? That was the last place I was, and then tomorrow morning I fly to Minneapolis to speak at a conference, and then Monday I fly to Austin. So I'm really like, I'm all over the place all the time. It's a little bit mind melting. But I grew up traveling. My parents were big travelers, and so it's kind of, I feel like it's in my blood. This photograph was taken near Oaxaca during Dia de los Muertos in probably 2001 or 2002. And this was in the town center, and these kids were just hanging out, and I was like, asked them in Spanish if I could take their picture. They just like lined, it was like the best timing. It's like one of my favorite photos to this day. And this is a wall in India. I tend to photograph, more than people, I tend to photograph walls and buildings for the most part. But now that I said that, I wonder if I'll have more photos of people. This is in Milwaukee, in River West. And I didn't write down the cross streets on this, and I know that this isn't there anymore, which is kind of a bummer, but I really like it. Winnesole. And this is a window at Michaela, who shot Himation. Her son had glued all these to the window, which I was like, that's going to really suck to get all that off of there. But it's just like gels from theater gels glued to a window. I thought it was really beautiful. I guess my point of showing you guys this is to just sort of see other stuff that I do, but also kind of inspiration. And this is, and that says "Take a Breath" if you look at it, chopped up differently. And this was in Baltimore when I was there for work a number of years ago. And I don't know, there was a series of these really beautiful lettered pieces on these abandoned buildings, and I don't know who did them. This was recently in Mexico, down near Cancun. I don't remember where this was, but I love, whoever did this just like poured glue in the cracks of the sidewalk and then dumped all this glitter in, and I thought it was really awesome. And again, this is Michaela's son that done this little sculpture. Michaela's one of my mainstay collaborators, so there'll actually be more stuff that she lives on a farm, and so I spend a lot of time out on her farm with her family. Okay, so I'm going to totally switch gears and start talking about my most recent film and book called Sign Painters. Have any of you guys seen it? I'm just curious. Okay, so a handful of you. Okay, so sign painters are people who paint letters. It's exactly what it sounds like, so if you don't know what a sign painter is, you're now going to know. Up until, I would say, the mid to late 70s, almost everything that you saw that had letters on it was done with a brush, by hand. There was no vinyl plotters, there was no inkjet printing. This was something that I've been conscious of because I was interested in letters from an early age, but I didn't think about the actual sign painter until I was living in Minneapolis and hanging out on the West Bank that I was talking to you about. And on the West Bank, this is Hartwig's Cafe, and I spent a lot of time there. I worked there. It's sort of the epicenter for a lot of things in Minneapolis, but at the time in the late 90s when I was living there, it was 24 hours. I wasn't 21. But these signs are all within a 3-block radius of Hard Times. And I was hanging out with a group of friends who happened to be graffiti writers during this time, and they were really interested in the person who had done all of this hand brushed work. So they went out and found this gentleman whose name is Phil Vandervaart, and Phil started letting them hang out at their shop. And so for me, I had been painting signs and doing menus and chalkboards for people around town, not knowing that that was like a legit job. But for me, that was the first time I found out that sign painters were like, they used to be like plumbers. It was just a trade. It was a trade job. People learned it in trade schools. People learned it in tech schools. People learned it in prison. People were self-taught. There's sign painter unions. There still are. A lot of the sign painters belong to the Scenic Painting Union now. But it was a really interesting turning point for me when I realized that this was a job. And it stuck with me, and it stuck with my group of friends so much that 5 of them have since grown and like around the country opened full-time sign shops, and they're all in their mid-30s. I'm 35, just to give you context of how, like, the trajectory of this. So this would have been when I was 19. So this was always lodged in the back of my brain. This is Phil, and these are some photos of signs that he's done. Phil's hand kind of dominates Minneapolis. You can tell his A's and his R's, and that's an interesting thing if you start to pay attention to letters and the signs. There's really, the sign painting industry is really intense and really, there's a lot of rules. You don't just learn overnight. It's very much not like our generation and younger, and you have to like spend a lot of time to learn how to do it correctly. So after I finished Handmade Nation, I still couldn't believe that there wasn't information about sign painting. I was still interested in science. I was still interested in hand lettering. And when you Googled it, there was just very little information there. So as a researcher and as a documentarian, you know, your goal is to kind of create good, you know, educated content for people to have access to. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna make this documentary about sign painting. So I approached my friend Sam Bacon, who I collaborated with. I do a lot of art direction for him for videos and commercial work. And I said, hey, do you want to do this documentary with me? I need help. I can't do it by myself. He's backed by a studio, so I need to have access to equipment. And and he said, yeah, maybe. He's like, what's a sign painter? And he's a graphic designer. He came out, you know, he's like this visually oriented person. So when I told him the story and I showed him the little bit of information at the time that I had, for him, that was him asking that question was enough for him to sign up and be like, yeah, let's make this documentary. Like, if I didn't know what that was, and it's this, you know, this beautiful and this amazing, and there's this much of a story, then we should do this. I kind of, for some reason, I didn't include the trailer for the film because, not like I expected everyone to know what it was, but I'm so, like, everyone's seen it. I can't even, like, watch the trailer anymore, but I did include some other footage that we released later, and I don't know when it's going to pop up, and when it pops up, it's just going to start playing, so I'll talk about it afterwards. But so Sam and I started, it was a similar process that I did with Handmade Nation. It was independently produced film. We followed our leads very editorially. I started with my core group of friends who I had stayed in touch with, the 5 guys that had opened their sign shops. They had each individually kind of gone out and found people to do formal and informal apprenticeships with, and we just started making lists of names and trying to find people. A lot of these sign painters at the time, didn't have websites. They didn't have online contacts. So it was like intense, awkward phone calling, research style. I hated it. I'm much better like with a letter than I am cold calling someone. Luckily, Sam's good at that part. I'm good at, we balance each other out really well, production-wise. But we just started filming almost 2 years later, 120 hours later. We cut ourselves off because we could have filmed forever. We found so many amazing, fantastic people who were excited to talk about their trade because for these guys, mostly guys, there's some women as well, for these people, they had never been acknowledged for their job, where they had been impacting people on a daily basis. And so people who are involved in the sign industry are really excited that this film has sort of given this new life, along with people's general interest and process. So again, with sign painters, similar to Handmade Nation, the timing of these projects were very appropriate. So when sign painters again, we blogged the process. My publisher who put out Handmade Nation was interested in doing a book, so we did a companion book. Not intentionally, the book came out before the film, it promoted the film, and we had a built-in audience waiting for this movie to come out. It came out in March. It premiered at the Smithsonian Renwick Gallery, which is amazing. We didn't do a traditional festival programming, and basically since March, I've been traveling with talking about sign painting, and it's been totally amazing and exhausting. Let's see, this is Caitlin Galloway. She's a painter in San Francisco. I think maybe you're showing. Nope, not yet. So this is actually our first weekend shooting. So Sam is in the green jacket. Travis O'Clair is our director of photography. Our normal setup would be Travis on the main camera, Sam second camera, and then me facilitating the interviews, and we just shot and shot and shot. And the thing with digital media is it's so inexpensive, so it's really awesome to be able to overshoot, but it can also be incredibly overwhelming content-wise. Our editors hated us. On the left is our movie poster, and something that I just want to mention with this project, and when you think about as an artist, if you're getting your work out there, and this I realize is a little bit more commercial than maybe what some of you are interested in doing yourselves, but we felt like everything that we did with this project needed to reflect the content of the film. So, for instance, when we signed our contract with Princeton Architectural Press for the book, we said, okay, this is great, you do beautiful books, however, we get to have a sign painter design and hand paint the cover of the book. And they were like, no. And we're like, oh yeah. And we won our argument with them because they're like, no one's going to notice. And we're like, well, the sign painters are going to notice. It's going to be huge. So we really needed the content of the promotional material to match the ethics of the film. So both of these things are hand lettered. And if you know, I don't think most people would register that because that's how good these people are at what they do. They can knock out lettering that you would just assume was done with a computer with a typeface. And normally I actually talk, I didn't put a lot of that information in this talk because I talk a lot and I still have a lot of slides on. So some of the things that happened, I mentioned the Smithsonian premiere. That was because I screened Handmade Nation there and I had a relationship with that gallery. Again, once you start forming these working relationships with spaces and with people, you don't know who's going to end up in what position. You don't know what person you went to school with or what tiny gallery that you showed at. What these people, everyone, moves forward with their lives. So I had developed a relationship with a curator at the Renwick Gallery, and they invited me to screen sign painters without ever watching it. So we had our world premiere at a Smithsonian institution with just based on them speaking to me, which was kind of really stressful. Luckily, it was successful. The cut that we showed there and the cut that we are showing now at the festival are actually two different films. That was sort of the first time we had seen an audience watch the movie, and we got feedback and we had to add some stuff. So I think talking about process, whether it's as a visual artist or as a filmmaker, always looking at what, hearing people's feedback and what they have to say to you, and allowing yourself room to potentially change things. So I just included this because I was pulling random photos. One of the crazy things that kind of came up with sign painters is we were invited to Walt Disney World to do a private screening for the Imagineers, who are the designers that basically do everything for Disney, like all the design, all the concept, all the rides. For me, it was very, well, it was flattering. It was also really crazy. I'm not a huge Disney endorser. It's super corporate, but it was a job, and we were like, yeah, we'll come. So we got to stay at the Disney resort for a week and do all this programming with Disney, and we got to get out all these tours of all the behind-the-scenes shops at all of the parks. So we got to meet all the on-staff sign painters, which was amazing, and they were so excited. And we initially, when we were working on the film, tried to interview some Disney employee sign painters because everything at Disney used to be hand painted. And there are still certain things at Disney that have to be hand painted because they are so detail oriented with certain like period pieces in some of their parks. But yeah, it was a really bizarre experience. So there's Sam and I talking to the Imagineers. I think our film was the first film that dropped the F-bomb in the Disney theater. We were kind of like cringing when that happened. No one said anything. So yeah, that's that. And I keep thinking it's gonna be the okay. So wait, I'm gonna all right before. Okay, so before this plays, I just want to put this into context. So we shot 120 hours of footage of this film, 80-minute final cut. That's what screens. We did our New York premiere in July. One of the featured segments of the book and in the film is this painting. This company called Colossal Media, and they do only hand paint billboards. So some of you might have seen, they went viral a couple years ago, like giant Jack Daniel ads, or like guys doing these crazy billboards in New York, like hanging off the side of the buildings. So before our New York premiere, the Sky High paint crew wanted to paint us an old school advertisement for our film in Brooklyn, where next to the theater. So they own the wall space. That's part of the outdoor advertising industry is you own the walls, you lease them out to companies. And they had an empty wall space, so they offered to do this job pro bono advertising our film. So it's kind of like we're not going to miss that opportunity to film that and to use it as promotional material for us. So Sam went and did a mini piece on them doing that. So this was something that was filmed after Side Painters was complete, and this was released maybe a month and a half ago as its own kind of separate piece. So I just wanted to put into context what this was.
My name is Gary Baxter, and I've been working for Colossal for just over 4 years now. I have a long history of painting and 15 years in the vinyl sign business, actually. My generation, a lot of us were involved with art, but when I started, that's just what it was about, writing on stuff, and somehow signs was just a part of that. The vinyl sign business was good to me. I could travel and have work, but it certainly was not a fulfilling job. Everybody thinks that we just paint all day, and they immediately assume that we can go right up on the side of the building and start painting. Most of the job that we do is rigging, and it's a real physical job. There's thousands of pounds of gear, and we either haul stuff upstairs or up rows up the side of the building, blocking out a wall white, and then patterning. So patterning the job can take 2 hours to an entire day. Nobody really realizes that and sees the hard work. And once we start painting, that's just as hard as rigging, but it's mental at that point. Well, you got years of rigging before you get up on that wall. You got it on your plate, so we got to know that if you're on a rig, you know what to do if something does go wrong. We get amazing painters here. They come in, think that it's going to go paint. Dangerous work. People get hurt or killed real easy. And we have more than just ourselves to think about. We have to think about the public. Matt's an awesome lettering guy. He designed the poster, and so we just thought it would be awesome if he could get up there and do it with us, because he fully deserves a little bit of recognition. He's a badass. I think people just like art. There is something there, you know what I mean? And especially when it's done at this caliber. There's something real there. There's something inside of us, and then it hits the wall. It hits the surface. Good is good, right? That stands the test of time.
So that was kind people, so it's really exciting, and also gonna get to show off that building. And it's still there, it's still running, they haven't leased it yet, so every once in a while, we'll have like a friend who's walking around Brooklyn, and I'll get like a text message, and it'll be like a picture of the lawn, like, yes! So, it's awesome. So that's all. I'm gonna leave that with the sign painter stuff right now because I could like talk 5 hours about sign painting, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end that you guys have about it. It's a super interesting topic. If you're interested in marketing, advertising, letters, it's all there. I mean, that's the root of all of it. And if you are interested, I do suggest going to see the film at the Union because the film itself is a really awesome educational piece. And now I'm going to switch directions to a whole other realm of my work, which is people living off the grid. And this is an ongoing photo project and personal lifestyle interest that I have. I personally am not looking to move and live off the grid myself, but I have a number of friends, some of whom I know from back in the day, from that cafe that I had mentioned, who have saved up money in different parts of the country and bought land and chosen to mimic similar back to the land concepts that happened in the 60s, but some of them with a more modern twist and some of them very similar. A lot of people have heavy political reasons for doing this, and some of them just don't want to deal with people, and this is how they want to live. This is a picture of a shack that I lived in, not this summer, but the summer before for the month of August. I have friends who have a land project, which is how a lot of the people who live on these off-the-grid communities refer to their homes and their land as land projects. So this is from a land project in North Carolina in the mountains, and this specific land is technically, officially off the grid. They have no electricity, they have limited solar power, they have gravity-fed water, which means there's a spring at the top of their mountain where they live, and they have run tubes down the mountain to literally gravity feed the water that's in some of the buildings. Not all of the structures have water. And I'm going to kind of jump around. This is different land. This is actually Michaela's farm out in rural Wisconsin. Michaela's not off the grid, but they have chosen to raise their family in a small town and to farm. So these photos, and this is Michaela's house, all of these photos, what I'm interested in doing is showing different people's lifestyle choices. As you can see, a lot of my work revolves around people's decisions to empower themselves creatively. A lot of the times that has to do with how they're living in their actual homes. Their environments become a part of their creative outreach as well. And so this is Michaela showing the kids how to milk the goats. So these photos, I feel like eventually will be a part of a book project that I'd like to do, but I think that initially I started shooting them just because I'm constantly shooting when I'm traveling, and then when I would show them to people or when I would put them online, the questions and the amount of interest that people had, I realized that it would be really lovely to put them all together in a place where, as a collection, where people can kind of look at them in a way to just think about how we live our own lives, and also like why people choose to do certain things. I mean, I don't think that, these choices are for everyone at all, but I think it's really interesting to think like, oh, it's going to be 2014, and there are people who are living without electricity by choice and growing all their own food, and they have no cell phones, and that's just their jam. That's what they want to do, and that's awesome. And I think that it's important to show people that that's going on. And so a lot of these photos, I feel like, will have more importance in 10 or 15 or 20 years. Because I know that the photos that I saw when I was younger, even though we didn't have access to the amount of content when we were younger, you found one photo of like something rad that influenced you, like that photo stayed on your wall for a long time, because you might not find another photo like that in wherever, however you found that. There was one photographer that someone gave me like a fancy art magazine when I was like 13 or 14, and there was one photographer whose work, this person named Jack Smith, who is a filmmaker and a photographer from New York, who influenced me so heavily just from this like one little spread in this magazine. And now the conversation about content and inspiration is totally different because of the internet, but I feel like these photos will have a lot more relevance later, but they're still really beautiful. This is a houseboat community on the Mississippi between Wisconsin and Minnesota. And some of these photos are up at the Nohl, so if you're interested in seeing these in person and spending more time with them, you should go to INOVA and see everyone's work, but these are what I chose to do in the gallery for my Nohl Fellowship. This is a geodesic dome houseboat, and it's actually the original structure had been there since the 60s. And the guy who built it saw my friends who were really involved with making art junk boats that would sail down the Mississippi, like Tom Sawyer style. He saw them floating down past his boat, and he flagged them down, and he was ready to let go of his home, but he wanted to make sure it went to someone who would appreciate it, so he sold them his geodesic dome houseboat for a $2 bill. Isn't that lovely story? It's a little more complicated than that, but that's like the general boring version. This is their houseboat, the side of the dome, and this is inside, so they're working on renovating that. These are from a couple years ago, and you know, a lot of the times the building for a lot of these projects goes really slow, partially because people don't have any money, partially just because building stuff yourself takes a long time. So if you're working a day job, like as a cabinet maker, how much time do you really have to like go home and work on your own thing? So there's really a lot of times very slow process with these. These are some of the pictures of my friends' boats that they had made. So these are photos of, they were showing us photos over dinner, and I was taking pictures of their pictures. Actually, so some of you, have you guys talked about swoon at all in your class yet?
Actually,
Next week? Okay. So are you going to talk about the floating cities at all, or is that not in the?
I will now.
Okay. So when you guys talk about swoon next week in the future, swoon is a artist who does large scale projects, which we'll talk about next week, but one of them are these floating cities of these art boats. And her community is one of many communities that does these boats made out of garbage and junk, and just these beautiful floating sculptures where they will literally pick a river and like float down the entire river. So these are from a trip that my friends took from Minneapolis all the way down to the Gulf, all the way down the Mississippi in these boats, which is really dangerous and also really amazing if you're into doing crazy adventures. There is material available about these books. There was an exhibit at the Philadelphia Art Alliance about swimming cities, and this really beautiful catalog published. So if you're interested in learning more about these boats, there is material available. I wrote an essay for that catalog that I'm wondering now what I wrote, but some more boats. And then again, we're going to go back to, this is North Carolina. So the houses in North Carolina on this land project are all made out of hay bale and mud. So the structures of the walls are framed out, and then they stack hay. And then they make this like mud clay mixture that creates the walls. And this is my friend Dan. This is a cello that he made by hand. Like a lot of these people are like super hardcore, like savant style gifted people. Dan Herman. He's a painter, and his house is incredible. This is his house. It's 2 stories. This is the upper story. And this is all built by hand. I don't know if I have photos of the slideshow, but the joints of the building are all wooden pegs. Like it's totally wild. And their land is actually on a mountain. So when I was told that before I went there, I was like, yeah. And I pictured like, you know, driving up this road and then parking and like going up a hill and then having this like, you know, flat ground. But all their houses are like on stilts. There's very little flat ground. So all of the gardening that they do is in these very small cleared spaces because it's North Carolina dense wooded towns. And this is actually, so this is in North Carolina in the fall, so you can kind of see a little bit better. And I spend about a minimum of 2 weeks here a year shooting this land. This is the land that I have like the most intimate relationship with. I have friends who live here year round, and then there's a number of people who kind of go throughout the year. And they have about 11 structures on their land. They have 60 acres. This is the wall up close, so you can like build these walls. And this is all natural earth buildings. If you're interested in looking at, there's tons and tons of information about this online. This is my friend Janet's house in North Carolina. This is right now where the library is housed. They're eventually going to have an apostille apothecary, library building. The people who live here make most of their income from wildcrafting, which is like gathering what's in the woods naturally, wildcrafting locally, like roots and things, and they make medicinal medicine out of it. So they distill alcohol, and they make not homeopathic, but they make medicine. We'll just leave it at that, using it in that language. This is a different housing community in North Carolina, in Asheville. And so this is interesting because they're right outside the city limits. And so they're in this kind of no man's land, but outside of the city jurisdiction, because a lot of times the city, well, aside from the building codes, like these houses are totally crazy, but there's only outhouses, there's no indoor plumbing. So they're actually going through a legal battle with the city because they're outside of the city limit, but there's issues with the zoning. It's just pictures from the communal kitchen where people, the month I was there last year, there was kind of this open house for the entire month, so people would post about Skillshare workshops of different things that they were doing in rides in and out of town. Well, I'm actually getting close. I think this might be my last slide. This is some land in Tennessee. There was a queer poetry gathering for a weekend, and I was allowed to come photograph this land that traditionally they don't allow photographers. But what's begun to happen is people, and this is, I guess I put this in here because I wanted to speak to building your, if you're working on a project and just having the respect and trust with the subjects that you're working with, like as a photographer, or potentially if you're, I can't think of another example for visual arts, but just respecting the communities that you are engaging with. And so I've now been kind of able to have access to places that traditionally a lot of photographers wouldn't be able to have access to. And I'm just very conscious of what photos I put online. I let everyone know what my intention is, why I'm there. And some people don't want to have their photo taken, and you need to respect that. There's no sneaking. So I think that might be, let's see. Yep, that was the last one. Oh, cool. We'll just put that back up. I don't really have like a big shebang to end on or anything. That was kind of it. I do a lot of different stuff. Does anyone have any questions? Do I have a formal art education? That's a great question. I don't. I opted to not go to school, partially because I was lost interest in high school, although my high school art department was a big reason of why I did a lot of the things I did. My high school was like this annoyingly overfunded suburban high school that had like a ceramics building and a photography lab with 40 enlargers. And so I finished high school purely because I had access to those resources. I had entirely lost interest in going to school. And I probably would have gone to college if someone had held my hand in filling out applications, but they didn't. I was sort of lost in the system. And I was already doing a bunch of stuff, and I was already working at this cafe in the city, I was part of this political activist community and doing all these things. So I just felt like it wasn't important. My parents are really awesome and supportive, so they never pressured me to go to school. They would have supported me, maybe not financially to go to school, but they would have been like, yeah, go to school, go for it. They're kind of just like, go for it. And they still are. It's awesome. It's really awesome to have supportive parents. So I did not get any formal education past my senior year of high school. I just work all the time. I'm really good with setting deadlines for myself and finishing stuff, and I think that, I've started a million things that I haven't finished, but they're kind of always lingering out there. Sometimes I'll put something to bed, but I have created my own system of getting stuff done. But since I've started working within educational institutions, doing more lecture-based work, I feel like I could still end up, I don't know, I could end up, I don't know if I want to teach, but I thought about going to grad school to buy myself a couple years financially for a while. I think that going to school has, for people who don't have certain resources, it's like really vital to like make connections in arts, like not just art school, but like within your community, because and the resources that you have available to you through school is like phenomenal. I mean, like everything's expensive. Like you have access to stuff at school that you wouldn't have like equipment wise, that I think is really amazing. Yeah.
I've just been curious why you chose to come to Milwaukee.
Why did I choose to come to Milwaukee? Also a good question. I had a pen pal that lived here. And I was living in Minneapolis. I had this pen pal. I had hundreds of pen pals when I was a teenager. Through the music community and through zines, I was like a huge letter writer, correspondent. And I had met I was on tour with this like punk band in the 90s, and I had gone to Chicago and met this person named John Fletcher, who I had stayed in touch with for years. I was living in Minneapolis, and I came to visit him, and I was like, I'm going to live in Milwaukee. So I moved to Milwaukee, and I've been here ever since. It was not really part of the plan. So, but I think Milwaukee's a really great place to be a working artist, because we have access to space in a financial way that a lot of other cities don't, and I'm a big supporter of that. Sure.
So at what point did you not only call yourself an artist, but feel like a professional artist?
At what point did I call myself an artist or feel like a professional artist? I probably didn't call myself an artist. There was definitely like a turning point where I was like, okay, I can embrace this. It was more like I was afraid to call myself an artist, even though I knew I was, because I didn't want to be challenged or something, or have somebody like, well, you're not an artist. So it probably was like around the time when like some of the I was getting validated from an outside source, which in retrospect is exactly what I'm trying to like work against. I think things should be really approachable. Like the way that I speak when I'm in front of, I want to be approachable. I want my work to be approachable. I want to start conversations. I want people to think about why they're doing stuff. I want people to feel like they can try new things. And so I think that part of what I'm doing is to kind of go against that. Like if you want to call yourself like an artist at any point, like I feel like people should be able to embrace that. It's up to you. It's like deciding whether you want to be called, like, you know, if your work is considered craft or if it's considered art or whatever. I just talk to myself out your face.
Well, I guess to piggyback on that, at what point did you start making, like, what was your first venture of income that was regular?
My first venture of income that was regular, like creatively?
Yeah.
Okay. I was working in the service industry, like doing food service in Minneapolis. I got a coffee shop, and I had a regular, this gentleman named Michael Summers, who's a puppeteer, who had gotten a huge commission from the Walker Art Center, and he had seen my handwriting on the chalkboard at the cafe, and he hired me to do all of his lettering, and then he found out that I was interested in doing like detail-oriented set design stuff, which is something that I didn't talk about any of that, but I do a lot of like art direction stuff. He hired me to be, I was like, I must have been 18 or 19, and he hired me, and that was my first creative art paid job. Then I got hired as a studio assistant at a wedding photography studio, and I just sleeved, it was like people, digital film cameras, so all I did was sleeve negatives. It was like the most eye-gouging job ever. It sucked. But then they saw my photos from vacation. I got my film processed through their lab, and they saw my photos, and they were like, oh, we didn't know that you shot, that you took pictures or you had an eye, and they hired me on as an assistant photographer. So when I moved to Milwaukee, they actually paid for me to drive back and forth to all these weddings, to do wedding photography, which is insane. Does anyone work as a wedding photographer? It's totally insane. It sucks. But it pays really well. So if you can ever shoot as a wedding photographer and you want to make money, it's awesome. But I had to cover all my tattoos. It was like, and I was a total dirtbag then, and it was like really stressful. So, yeah. But it paid, and so those are my two. That was like a really big deal for me to make money, like getting paid to do something creative. And then like I sold like a piece of work at a coffee shop one time, and that was like a huge deal. giving people those opportunities, and that's kind of like having a retail space and having a gallery, blogging about someone's work, like it's giving people those like that boost to their, you know, like having someone else validate you feels, you know, it's huge. It's like a really big deal. So, you know, if you guys like people's work, you should always tell them. When people email me and they say that I made an impact on their life, it's like, it like makes my terrible days of like, why am I doing this? Why am I going into the debt to do these films? Like, it totally makes it worth it. So, everyone's just people. You know, like they're really good, really, I have a few minutes. Being approachable, I just want to speak to this really quick. For our book, Ed Boucher did the introduction for Sign Painter book, and if you don't know who that is, he's a really important painter. And Sam was like, he was trained as a sign painter, and a lot of his paintings have signage in them. And Sam was like, we should ask Ed Boucher to do the introduction for our book. And I was like, that's crazy. He's not going to do. How are we going to do that? He's like, wow, let's just ask. And I was like, okay, you ask. So he called the gallery that he's represented by, and he like told them we're doing this project about sign painters, and they're like, that sounds interesting. Put it in an email. And then they like his assistant read him the email, and he was like, yeah, I'd love to write the foreword for your book. And you just have to remember that even though people are like famous or seem potentially unreachable, that they're just people, and it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst thing that can happen is that they won't respond, or they'll just say, no, I don't have time, or don't, you know, I don't know. Like it's just remembering that people are like, everyone is, regardless of if it seems like it or not, like you should always ask people for help or see if they can give you feedback or for help on projects. Does anyone else have any questions?
What's your process in going about finding these off the grid people?
My process in going about finding off the grid people, it's because I have friends who live there. So now it's word of mouth. I'll just hear about places. Although I have a list of places that I have no connection to that I'm interested in shooting, because I want to show different landscapes. So I don't have any friends who live in like desert landscapes, but I just read about this community that's there, and I'll just send them a letter. All right, an email, not a letter, but I'll send them an email, and then follow up and just sort of put my foot out there. Probably not until I have money where I can go or time, because for me it's more just carving time out to go stay somewhere, so I can actually brush and like hang out. For me, when I'm shooting photos, my best time to shoot is the first time I've gone somewhere. When I start to go back somewhere, I lose perspective on the space. So when I have, it's like a fresh canvas. Like when I go to a space, my best work comes from the first time. Like if I go to a city for the first time or a neighborhood, that's when I get my what I think is my best work.
If Milwaukee claims to, like, you know, promoting art is a great thing. We have the Third Ward Gallery Night, which is really important, maybe Gallery Night. But as a whole, galleries haven't really succeeded in Milwaukee. They come, they go, they fade. How can we claim to be pro-art and promote the arts without without so many galleries in Milwaukee?
Well, how can we claim to promote art without the grassroots galleries surviving? Is that a good summary-ish?
Yeah.
Good. So I can answer that personally. I can't answer it for everyone. My way of doing that is to keep providing a space for people to do stuff, keep going to things. I mean, the reasons that galleries don't succeed, I mean, I don't know how the high-end gallery world works. I think it's like, I still don't get it. I have friends who are rep by like, what I would call a fancy gallery, like a fine art gallery. I mean, I do know how it works. It's totally crazy, but meaning that you have to hustle people's work to people who probably don't care about the work, which I have no interest in. But the way that we can claim that we support the arts is by going to stuff. Because for me, the biggest like kick in the stomach is when I have a show that I know is a solid show of someone's work, and then the same 20 people come. It is so insane to me that people don't go out in Milwaukee. People do not go to the south side if they're on the east side, and vice versa. It is like, you have to go to stuff. Like if you want to feel like you're participating in an art community, like you have to go to stuff. And there will always be grassroots things happening. There's tons of stuff going on, and I think because of Facebook, we have access to that. You might have to dig around a little and figure out, maybe there's a gallery that shows stuff that you're more interested in. Go to all their shows. If you can't, post about it. Tell people that it's there. If you go to a show and you like it, talk about it. And that's my only response to that is like, financially and monetarily, I've never made money as a gallery owner, but that's not why I do it. Would I want to? Yeah, totally. Do I know how? No, not in Milwaukee. Because most of the work that we sell, that I've sold in the gallery, I sell to out-of-state buyers. So people in Milwaukee, and we're talking like paintings like within the like $200 to $800 range, which is low for gallery sales. Because as a gallery, you only keep 50% of that, and the artist gets 50%. So for a gallery, if you have a space and you're paying rent, like there's a lot of overhead. Do you have any follow-up questions with that? Did I skirt around your?
That's fine.
I mean, do you go to shows? Go to stuff.
Try to.
Yeah, you like that? All right. Does anyone else have any questions? For sure.
You have such a diverse array of environments that kind of inform your work. And I was wondering, you have rural, urban, very, very people-based, very naturalistic environments. I was wondering if there's something that breeds commonality through that, or something that attracts you, or something that you can draw from specifically when it's your first time going places, like something you look for as a constant.
I mean, I would say things that are interesting, but that's so vague, and why I'm really bad about talking about my work. Writing about it. Doesn't it suck to write about your own work? It's the worst thing ever. I don't know what the theme is between my work. It was really nice for the Nohl to have someone write about my work, because I was like, oh yeah, that's totally what I do. And the essay that's in the catalog, well, it kind of talks about that, and I can't remember what he says exactly, but I think that there's totally similarities between all the things that I do. I am unable to articulate them, and I'm okay with admitting that, because it's really hard to talk about what you do. What's that?
Networks and communities.
Networks and communities. See, thanks. I mean, it's really, I'm interested in people, I'm interested in process, I'm interested in people who are doing things that they're passionate about. I'm interested in colorful landscapes, and, I have a lot of interests. I mean, and it's, like I said, they start to overlap, like now that I can step back from them and like when I talk about it more, but specifically, I mean, if you put 3 things in front of me, I could tell you immediately the thing that I'm drawn to. So maybe that would be there's reasons why I'm drawn to certain stuff. So
Can I then flip that around?
Sure.
And just maybe give an anecdote? Where is, or has been in all the environments, the place that's been most visually stunning?
the place that's been most visually stunning, Thailand. Bam.
Boom.
Yeah.
There we go.
Love it. I love it there. Yeah. Did you have another question? Or?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, in all of your interests and all of your data that you collect, what's an organizing tip that you could maybe give?
An organizing tip.
Like
I
if
wish
you're-
I could show you my desktop, because I just put it in a folder called desktop. So I'm selling myself short. I'm super organized. I label stuff photo-wise. I back everything up double, at least once a month. I mean, with digital media, I hate digital media. I am so bad with I shoot a lot of photos. I shoot on my phone on average probably 30 photos a day. It's so overwhelming. I have photos that I know exist that trying to dig them out. I think just labeling folders. I use a folder. I definitely have a weird system. It's probably really archaic. Just labeling stuff. Whatever works. I think whatever you do, as long as it's consistent, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just figuring out a pattern of what works for you organizing, and then who cares if anyone else gets it. If it works for you and it's consistent, that's my advice. Be consistent. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
In terms of your latest photos, are there any other photographers or artists that influenced you? Because it reminds me of Sally Mann.
Sally Mann has definitely influenced me, whether or not thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. There are other people who have. The answer is yes. There is, I'm gonna blank on her name. There is a woman who I'm in a show with right now, who specifically was shooting feminist land projects for a number of years. I saw those photos probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they definitely made an impact on me just because I'm interested in spaces and communities. And I think my biggest influence as a photographer are photojournalistic books from the 60s and 70s. So documentary style photography, as photojournalistically, is my biggest influence, photography wise, for sure. And I think, I have any book that I've been able to get my hands on about, land, back to the land communities and communes. I mean, it's a subject that I'm interested in, and I'm interested in the connections between the generation gap and what the similarities are and what the differences are. And it's something that I would not consider myself an expert on, but that I can speak to enough to get around in a conversation. But photography is my true love because it allows a porthole into a room. I mean, I think it's so interesting to be able to look at a photo and to look at what the photographer was shooting and to look beyond that and to see what other information is available in that picture and what you can take from that. And that's really powerful. And it's really exciting to be able to do it so cheap. Well, it's not really cheap because I have to buy all the equipment, but I mean, I used to shoot, I overshoot, I've always overshot. I have spent more money on film and film processing than I would ever care to admit. And I can't even imagine what I would have to do if that was still the case. I mean, I still toy with the idea of shooting film. I think that there's benefits of it. I don't know, the idea that I could shoot as much as I want and to not have to pay for it is it tickles my fancy. Anyone else? Sure. Wow.
I'm curious sort of about any advice you have with networking. I tend to do well meeting people, but I'm curious how you sort of foster those relationships into either personal or working. And then also what priority you put on sort of carving out time for that, community building with people.
So, okay, how do I foster the connections that I've made or developed potentially online or whatever? And then, what was the second part?
Just what level of priority do you put on that as far as time management?
Okay, so then what level of priority? I'm repeating it for you guys, but also for myself. What level of priority do I put on with time management? Okay, so I'll answer the second part first. Depending on what my focus is during the month or I work really far out schedule-wise. So say I'm working on booking the gallery for the year. Then at that point, I would probably be putting more energy into facilitating conversations with artists that I've been talking to or who have contacted me or work that I've been interested in, because I want to kind of place those people into those spots. So from a curatorial angle, there's that. Also because I have colleagues that are working in other art worlds doing curatorial work, I kind of always have a running catalog of people who I try and hook up with other people. I'm really good at making those connections. So I guess it's always kind of in the forefront of my brain, but it's really effortless for me. So I think it's some people are really good at, A, B, and C, and it's something that it comes very easily to me. I spend a lot of time with it, but I also have recently tried to step back a little bit because social media is not only very addictive, but it does take a lot of time and it does take away from your studio practice. So it just depends. When I was promoting sign painters at the beginning, I was spending a lot of time engaging and making sure I was responding to people and this person liked this, so I want to look at their page and comment on their thing. I mean, I'm pretty on top of it. I answer every single email that we get to our account, which is a lot for just the sign, for everything. But I do all of the communication stuff for sign painters for the most part. Sam does the Instagram account, which is awesome. Instagram, obviously, looking at my work, I'm a huge fan of Instagram. I love it because I can just shoot stuff. I have a place for all my stuff. maybe it just speaks for itself. When Instagram came out, I was like, this is the one for me. Because I would just post photos on Facebook all the time, and it was, it's a disaster now. But social media, I think it's crazy how you can connect people and meet people through social media. I find a lot of the artists that I've worked with through Twitter and through Instagram and through Facebook and from reading art blogs. I mean, a lot of the work and a lot of the artists who I've developed relationships with that have really grown into years of working with someone or someone's career. I would have been the first out-of-state show that they ever had, and now they're showing at MoMA. I mean, there's been all of these really interesting things that have developed purely from meeting people online.